eating and sort of nourishing things that are good for you and optimizing your health, or things that I thought about and sort of innate in my culture. So when I part of creating Sugarbreak was I thought it was so interesting that this synergistic relationship between Eastern and Western medicine in my life wasn't really reflected in a lot of people's lives in the Western world. It was a lot about dealing with symptoms after you have a problem, which, it has its place and it's really important, but people aren't thinking about their health proactively. And I really wanted to sort of crack that nut and switch that mindset. Eastern natural medicine is great for that and optimizing your health there.
Let's link up with Krista on the Fix. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
What's going on, FYX listeners? Welcome to episode 50 of the podcast. I am so excited. We're officially 2 weeks away, 2 episodes away from 1 full year of the FYX. And it's just been such a fun journey. And I'm going to talk more about it in one of my upcoming, probably solo episodes, just in the year that I've been doing this, the amazing people I've connected with, everything that I've learned. But very happy to be coming at you guys today, not just me, but with a guest, a very amazing guest. Her name is Scarlett Leung, and she is the CEO of a cool emerging company called Sugarbreak. Sugarbreak is probably one of the first, if not the first, natural non-prescription support system that helps you manage sugar. And what I absolutely loved about this whole conversation and what the company stands for is that everything's about moderation. That's 100% in line with what I preach to all clients that I work with. It's not about saying that foods are inherently good or bad. It's not about saying you can't have something and live from this place of sacrifice, total sacrifice and restriction. Instead, it's about meeting yourself where you are and managing something when maybe it's too much for you, or too much of anything. Even a good thing we know is technically a bad thing. So Scarlett and I sat down to talk about the company, their 3 main products. I'm also very happy to share that those FYX listeners out there get a little hookup if you want to try Sugarbreak yourself. So it's literally like a supplement that you can take the same way you take your vitamins. And something we talk about in this conversation today is why their packaging is so fun and cool, because it's meant to make you feel a little more excited about putting something else into your routine. And it just helps you curb your sugar intake. It doesn't make you eliminate it. It doesn't convince you that you're intaking way too much sugar into your day. But I've had a couple friends who've used the product so far. I've tried it myself, and everyone's been reporting really, really interesting and noticeable results. It's clinically backed. It's been tested. And I'm excited to be able to help share the story on this company and what they're hoping to accomplish, not only in the world of diabetes, because it's so prevalent today. Little statistic, 1 in 3 Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic, but also dealing with insulin resistance. It's becoming more and more popular, unfortunately. And there's actually a lot of people walking around not even recognizing the fact that they may be insulin resistant. So I just love that there's these new emerging products, like exactly what Sugarbreak has created and is continuing to expand with their entire line to be able to help you manage your blood sugar at home. So Scarlett and I cover the gamut of the conversation, working in the health components of all of this, why she's so passionate about it, how having a close friend who is diabetic really prompted her to become a part of this company, and just her journey as an entrepreneur. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode, and I'm not going to talk too much because I want to dive right into it. So if you listen to it, you want to learn more about Sugarbreak, you want to check it out, links in the show notes for you to go right to their website. All FYX listeners, if you enter the code The FYX, remember it's FYX, at checkout, you'll save 15% on your first order. What is up, everybody? This is Coach Krista, and I am back on our latest episode of The Fix. And it's actually been a little while since I've done another interview. I've had some changes to my schedule, managing another full-time job, and it's just been easier to fly solo for a good almost 6 weeks, if not 2 months at this point. And I'm really excited because I have a very special guest with me today. And before I steal her thunder and steal her introduction, we're going to get right into it. This is Scarlett, and she is the CEO of an amazing company, a very new and cool company that you can already see all over the shelves in Target in less than like 6 months, which I think is incredible. And I do want to talk about that, called Sugarbreak. Sugarbreak is really changing the game for people looking at managing their blood sugar, whether you're diabetic or whether you simply just want to be healthy and look at your vitals. So before we talk all about the company itself, we're going to give Scarlett the floor and give her the spotlight and let her talk about her journey, how she got to where she is today. And when I frame up this question on every episode, as I mentioned to you, Scarlett, what I like to do is I like to ask my interviewee, who are you? So who is Scarlett? And more specifically, why should we care about what you have to say?
Hi, Krista. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I love your question. I think the way I think about, why I exist in this world, I really hope that I can leave the world a better place than when I got here. And I sort of use that as my North Star when I think about what I spend my time on. And of course, Sugarbreak sort of fulfills that mission. We're trying to help people take back control of their relationship with sugar. And a big part of it is tackling the diabetes pandemic that's now impacting so many people. Official stats, 1 in 3 Americans are pre-diabetic or diabetic, but you'll hear a lot of experts in the field actually refer to 1 in 2 people. And the thing is, most people do not even know, 80% of people don't know that they have any issues with blood sugar. And it impacts so much about our lives. Sorry, I'm in New York.
Oh, good. We're in New York. We made a joke about that. It was bound to happen.
It impacts so many things about your health. It's not just, we know what diabetes is, but research on, aging, dementia, and just general inflammation and, your immunity. Sugar has a really big impact on that. So I'm hoping to be able to make a change there and help people live better and fuller lives.
I love that. And there's a lot to unpack with some of those stats. And I'm happy that you brought up the point that so many people just don't even know. So while we do have this set of statistics, there's a lot of people walking around out there, I think we can say, with some sort of insulin issue, if we kind of want to make the broader strokes, right? Whether that's pre-diabetes or formally being diagnosed with some type of insulin resistance, you are 100% correct. As a nutrition coach myself, I do spend a lot of time and take a lot of pride in looking at my clients' blood work and talking to them about what those indicators mean in the context of glucose, in the context of insulin, even in other markers on their blood work that you might think don't necessarily relate to the stuff that your doctor's saying to you, like, hey, we need to watch this, or hey, we need to look at this. And I know I shared with you before we started recording that I had Dr. Casey from Levels join me on my show not too long ago. And she made a really great point that I think is we all kind of know is there, but we need to start talking about more. And that's the amazing part about your company, conversations like this, all of the podcasts out there that are diving into this a little bit deeper, is the fact that so many decisions that lead up to what gets us into the doctor's office to the point where your doctor is saying, hey, we have a problem, that happened 10 years in the making. And we could have caught that earlier if we had different conversations about, as she had said to me, the tiny micro decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis outside of the doctor's office. And I know we'll get into all of that and then some, but before we do, I've got the signature FYX question, and I know you're a big coffee drinker, so I'm excited to ask you, what do you like to sip on in the morning? What's a part of your morning routine?
Oh, coffee is definitely a part of my morning routine. Depends on the day. I sort of switch between, okay. I'm very lazy, then it'll be an espresso pod. If I have time, it will be a pour over.
Nice.
But I will.
Do you make your own pour over? Like you have the whole process? Or you go get it?
No, I make my own. I feel like it's something very relaxing to do in the morning, and
it is
to like smell the coffee. I love being able to pick the beans. There is an amazing coffee shop close to me called Devotion that is the freshest coffee beans from Colombia. So one in my
Ooh,
previous role at Fresh Direct, we helped bring it into the US, and they also feature like female growers. So I
oh, that's
love
so
that.
amazing.
And so, yeah, so I usually make a coffee, put in some collagen powder and oat
Nice.
milk.
Yum. I love it. I'm a big oat milk's having its moment, I think we should say. I'm a fan of it. I like it. I think it's great in lattes. It really something about the way it froths, it sets it apart from your
Yeah,
almond milks and other milks of choice.
yeah, it's creamy. It has a little bit of sweetness, so you don't have to add any sugar. I try to eat half an hour before I have my coffee so it doesn't spike my blood
Have
sugar
you
in the
found that
same
if you
way.
don't, that it does spike your blood sugar? This is the perfect
Yes,
segue because I
yes,
did want
and
to ask you this anyways.
I get the jitters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting because before I interviewed the levels team, I actually wore the continuous glucose monitor for 30 days or it was maybe like 2 weeks into it at that point. But my biggest takeaway from it, there's two things that spiked my blood sugar personally the most. The first one was being stressed out. I actually noticed that if I was rushing to do something at one point, I had a couple of podcast interviews in one day and I was running late for one of them and I had the monitor on. So I just looked at it afterwards and I saw that in the 30 minutes leading up to it, when I was getting ready and the reason why I was late, my blood sugar went up and up and up and up. And the only other thing that really did that significantly, because I am the type of person, I never eat, I like to call it no naked carbs. So most of the foods I'm eating also have a protein and fat every single time. So I didn't expect to see any crazy numbers. And I was happy about that. But the only other thing that did it was coffee. And for me, it didn't matter if I ate. For whatever reason, it still made it spike. And it was just so much more dramatic than any other type of food or liquid I had in my day. So it's interesting.
For me, yeah, that's a spike. And the other problem I had was maintaining a level blood sugar because I have low blood sugar. So
Okay.
that having fats and proteins was so important and made me really conscious of that because I had to maintain a steady blood sugar throughout the day and not let it drop.
And when did you learn that about yourself? So has a lot of that knowledge come out of your experience now with Sugarbreak? Has it come out of, I do want you to give a little bit of the backstory about your friend who was diagnosed with diabetes.
Yeah.
Was it going through that process alongside of him, the company? What was it for you that just kind of sparked the interest in this and then learning more about it in the context of your own health?
Yeah, so I think in my own health, my mom would always be talking about blood sugar growing up.
Oh,
and,
really?
I
Okay.
have, I'm Chinese. So I've always grown up with both Eastern and Western medicine. So this
Okay.
thought of eating and sort of nourishing things that are good for you and optimizing your health or, things that I thought about and sort of innate in my culture. So, when part of creating Sugarbreak was I thought it was so interesting that this synergistic relationship between Eastern and Western medicine in my life wasn't really reflected in a lot of people's lives in the Western world. It was a lot about dealing with symptoms after you have a problem, which, it has its place and it's really important, but people aren't thinking about their health proactively. And I really wanted to sort of crack that nut and switch that mindset. And, Eastern natural medicine is great for that and optimizing your health there. And then the reason why I started Sugarbreak, we talked about my company prior to this was in the fertility world. And I started that company because two of my very close girlfriends went through a fertility process and had a really, really bad experience. So I knew nothing about healthcare. I actually got recruited into it by the investors behind the largest fertility network to create this, egg freezing business. And they were like, we can teach someone healthcare, but we can't teach someone to care about someone and have that customer experience. And so when I started that company and I saw how creating something outside of traditional healthcare network could impact so many people's lives and move so quickly, I knew I just couldn't go back. And so, the whole, diabetes and sugar just impacts so many more people. So I thought if I could create a new business that would be just as successful and touch even more people's lives, that would be time really well spent for me. And so, one of my close friends got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which is very rare. just before he turned 40. And I saw how difficult it was for him, because he was like my friend who was, we would talk about like food all the time and make cocktails together. That was like our thing. And he worked for an alcohol company, and he left his job. Like all the things that he loved he could do, like having a piece of pastry would be days of planning, in order to work out, to just have enough insulin. And it was really shocking to me how there are so little tools out there. You either have pharmaceutical medication, or you have basically willpower driven lifestyle changes, and there are no tools in between to help people. And when you think of the average person being diagnosed, between type 1, more so type 2 in their late 30s, and you have 40 years of your life to upkeep, and constantly think about this every day, it gets exhausting. And, people have slip ups and then they beat themselves up over it. And also there's a ton of stigma around diabetes that so many people I spoke to, not even their closest family and friends, know, because there's so much shame around it. So I wanted to create something that would change all of that. And that's why, our products are, created in a way that, address the pain points that people deal with in their daily life, from sugar consumption to managing, their blood sugar on a daily basis. But our packaging is really colorful, because I wanted people to feel like, if that's the first thing they take in the morning and they see it, to feel some level of empowerment and joy. And it's not, they're like taking a sad, from a pill bottle, or, something, crunchy homeopathic that I don't feel works. And, be more proactive around it. And I thought, if they can do that, then it's a much more sustainable way of living.
I think that it's really interesting. I'm very happy you brought up the packaging, because I do want to talk about that too. And I love that. It didn't occur to me to think about that piece of it, because, I take my supplements, but like I realize that even me, I'm not great at taking them. And if I think about all the bottles, they're all like white and kind of boring looking, or very like granola, they're brown. And that's kind of it, right? So I do like that, the fun aspect, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but I also know that the pediatric and child component to this is very important too. But I do want to go back to a few different things that you touched on there. And the first one being this idea of whether it's type 1 or type 2 diabetes, and kind of what I was getting into about talking about the fact that, like, to an extent, many more people have some sort of issue with insulin, whether that is prediabetes, type 1, type 2, whatever, and the stigma around it and the shame around it, and the fact that so much of our lives revolves around food. I think this is a very timely topic going into the holiday season. I've just am wrapping up a series. By the time we drop this episode, it'll be completed, but I've been doing a few solo episodes recently talking all about like how to manage the holidays and why they don't have to derail your nutrition goals. And I think so much of it for people comes down to the fact that we have this very specific societal connection of like food is synonymous with the holidays. And sometimes it makes us lose sight of the fact that just because the food is there, we don't have to eat it all the time. And that's very obvious. And it's really easy for us to sit here and say that, right? Like we can sit here and say the food's in front of you. It doesn't mean that you have to eat it. Some people struggle with the fact that like they don't want to give in to temptation of the leftovers. And then that actually turns into them overeating in that moment. But you think about that for the quote unquote average person who does not have diabetes, that's not a huge consequence for them in a lot of ways, right? For somebody who does, that is an immediate consequence. Like they can get themselves very sick. And I think that can be lost on other people because to us, it's like, oh, just don't eat carbs, don't eat pasta, don't eat this. Like I'm going to say all the no's of things that I never preach to my clients because that mode of having good foods and bad foods and things being off limits never works out for anybody. But in this case, it's all the more real and because it's putting themselves in a situation where they literally will not be well in an instant, right? So I'd love to know what your take is on, and this is kind of a loaded question, but I'd love to know what your take is on just insulin in general as a medicine for diabetes. And I use the word medicine because that's really what it's kind of turned into. And I've recently been reading this book. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called Metabolical. It's written by Dr. Lustig, and it's all about like big pharma, big health, big food. And there's a couple pages in there that really stood out to me because I've never thought about this before. But if you look at the history of diabetes and the way the medical community has treated it, the focus has really been on this foundation of, well, people have an insulin imbalance. So for anybody listening to this who doesn't really understand diabetes, I do think it's important to give the context that it can go one of two ways. Your body either can't process the insulin that's being made, or your body is making too much of it, right? And so that's where the insulin comes in. Or
not making it.
Not making it at all.
Yeah.
Yep. So your body's not making it at all. And if you do make it, in some situations, your pancreas just doesn't know what to do with it. So you can still have the same side effect of your blood sugar going through the roof. Because of that, the response was, from this person's perspective and kind of like explaining the history of medication, was, okay, well, let's just give people the insulin that they're missing to balance themselves back out, because that almost then allows them to still eat the way that they wanted to a degree. That right there, in my opinion, is inherently a problem, because you're not actually trying to help the person, like look at their food sources or look at what they can do to still enjoy their life, but balance being healthy. It's just like, oh, well, we know you're going to eat carbs, so like, let's fix this by giving you more or less of whatever you're missing or don't have or do have. And I think that Sugarbreak has a huge opportunity to kind of change that and change the perception around that, because of more of your influence of the Eastern medicine and that homeopathic approach. So I just love your take on that. I haven't heard you talk about this on any other interviews before, and I don't know if it's a little bit of a taboo kind of topic, or how if it's polarizing in any way.
I mean, as a type 1 diabetic, you're not making insulin, right? So you have to inject yourself with insulin in order to stay alive. My view of that just breaks my heart, because I think about how long insulin has been around for, like 100 years. And
exactly.
And I'm Canadian, so it was actually invented in Toronto, my hometown.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the scientist who invented it actually sold it for $1, because it was like, this is a life-saving medicine. And so I'm selling it for $1. Please mass produce it and save all these people's lives.
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
But if you look at statistics, the US is by far a multiple in terms of pricing, and has gotten so expensive that some people basically choose between staying alive and taking insulin, or not being able to afford food, that's
covered in this book. Right. And that's covered in this book of how it's just turned into this money-making machine. And that in and of itself is like, is there a better way to fix the root of the problem so that it isn't a money-making machine where it's become its own industry in its own right?
And the scary thing about type 1 is that it's an autoimmune disease. And the latest statistics are that actually COVID triggers it in a lot of people. Over 14% of people who have been hospitalized have now developed type 1 diabetes. So it used to be called juvenile diabetes. I don't know if you remember. And now,
yes, I do.
All the autoimmune diseases, it's called type 1 because people later on in life are getting it. But my philosophy behind the holidays and eating, it's about moderation and not deprivation. And I talk a lot about, we have this month of November, December, where we're like, you can go off the rails, like the holidays, like treat yourself, indulge. And somehow on January 1st, it's like, oh, time to go on this super strict diet, new year, new you, dry January. I'm like, why did you, and you're like you've made so much damage in the past 2 months, like just
you made it so much harder for yourself too when January rolls around.
And it's a horrible cycle. Like it's called a resolute, it just keeps on going on, and it's a vicious cycle. So we want people to think about it differently. We have one of our products is called Stabilize, and it's a natural carb and sugar blocker. So if you take it, your blood sugar spike reduces by 42%. You don't get the same drops. And it does that by tricking your gut into not digesting 40% of the carbs and sugars that you eat and turns into fiber. And I get a lot of questions about like, they're like, then you're telling people to eat more. I'm like, no, the point is that if you allow people to eat a normal meal and remove the guilt, it's more sustainable. And also you're not creating as much damage over the holidays. And the whole, we are, as humans, we need human connection, right? And like holidays is such a big part of that, but food is inevitably a part of almost all of our social gatherings. And if you speak to someone who has issues with blood sugar, they will say that eating is the loneliest, most difficult part of their day, because that's when they feel the most isolated, when they can't eat the things everyone else is eating. People feel sorry for them. And I really wanted to change that.
Yeah. And I think that's so valid, because I completely get that from not even talking with clients who do have more of a serious issue, but even just people they're examining their relationship with food, right? And I know that you have a clinician on your team that is, I don't remember his official title, but I know does something where his focus is on managing eating disorders, right?
Right. He's the chief of eating disorders and obesity at Mount Sinai in New York. And we have another advisor, Molly Carmel, who's a sugar addiction expert.
That's really cool. And I think that it's great that those two components are a part of this, because first of all, it speaks to the fact that this product can be for anyone, and it doesn't have to be for the person that may have this formal diagnosis first and foremost. And hopefully at the end of the day, that will help get to the root of a lot of this, so it doesn't turn into everyone else becoming a statistic. But I also think it's interesting because it acknowledges the fact that like, a lot of people don't necessarily take the time to examine their relationship with food. And it usually comes down to working with a coach like myself, or unfortunately it becoming an extreme situation, whether that's binge eating or in the opposite direction, dealing with anything from anorexia to bulimia. And there is just as much of an importance that should be placed on eating disorders as disordered eating. And I think there's a lot of people walking around with disordered eating. And I think something that can make coaching hard and actually working with someone is I'm asking the people I work with to look at themselves in the mirror and peel back some really hard layers of an onion that they may use food to cope with, right? And I have conversations with people that sometimes are pretty emotional and hard for them to talk about. But once they do, it's the breakthrough that we needed to be able to help them move forward and actually figure out what it is that is preventing them from losing weight. And I put that in quotes because I think so many people, like we talk about the fact that diets are failing everyone. And a lot of times it's because it's not looking at the mindset, and it's not looking at the behaviors. It's not looking at the mechanisms or the events or instances that are triggering the person to do the things, make the choices that they're making that put them in the position where they are unhappy with how they look, how they feel, whatever it is. I know that wasn't necessarily a question, but I'd love just kind of like your reaction to that and how Sugarbreak fits into a lot of this, and in looking at diet culture, I guess. That's how I'd turn it into a question. Like, how does Sugarbreak fit into the idea of diet culture? Because I really love what you just said about the fact that you've gotten the like feedback from people. Well, aren't you just encouraging people to eat more? Because that wasn't my inclination at all when I got the box in the mail. Like my mind didn't even go there.
That's a great question. I was going to say diet culture as well. And somehow diet used to be described what we ate in a day, right? And now it's become this short-term sort of fixed situation where you're eating things or not eating things that you would usually do, and to sort of quickly.
That's why my whole brand is called the Fitness Fix. So yes, I agree with you there.
And change something in your health. And so, when we thought about Sugarbreak, it was all about sustainable lifestyle changes and tools to make it sustainable. And that's why, it's all about fitting seamlessly into your life. Like Stabilize, you only take it 10 minutes before a meal. Like it has to be easy. It has to be quick. It has to, resist, which is the Listerine strip that blocks the taste of sweet. I call it willpower your pocket, but it had to be small. It had to be a strip because it dissolves right away. It works right away. And so people can easily integrate it into their daily life and not have to put so much thought. And being able to have these little tools is a feeling of empowerment. You're taking care of yourself and you're making conscious decisions for that. And hopefully that will, alleviate the guilt around, because I think the negative mindset makes it the most difficult. And you probably know that more than anyone.
Oh yeah, for sure. From personal experience and working with somebody to change my outlook on food really helped me and inspired me to then do what I do on a daily basis now. But I also think, like you said, it's a tool. And I think it's important to contextualize a lot of these things, like the gadgets that we have or the different diets that people recommend to us. Like we've gone in a direction, most likely because of social media, where there's a hierarchy of like, this way is the best, or this way is the worst, or this is the method you should choose. And I'm very open in sharing that I am somebody who really focuses on macronutrients with all of my clients. And I get very frustrated when I see typically, I don't mean to put them all in a box, but this is usually how it goes. A dietitian or somebody who has gone the intuitive eating route, and it came out of spending a lot of time tracking their food to the point where they then poo-poo that. And they say intuitive eating is the only way. And I challenge those people to say, but that's not fair because they're both tools. And you used the macro tool at some point in your life that allowed you to grow into the person who then has the education and knowledge to be able to intuitively eat. I think something like intuitively eating is arguably a little bit dangerous because if you break all of this down, and we can even go back to our own childhoods and me asking you the question of like, what kind of influence this? And you talked about the Eastern and the Western medicine. And I actually studied abroad in China. And it's interesting because people always have the typical stereotype of like, oh, everybody in Asia, they're much smaller people. And then you think about the fact that like we have rice there at every meal. Yeah. I think so much of that has to do with just like cultural aspects of the way they take care of the rest of their health. And I observed that firsthand when I lived there. But to the whole point of like, how do we figure out what tools are best? I think we need to appreciate the fact that now more are becoming available and we shouldn't like just solely rely on one. And with that, I guess my question for you is we understand like how you see something like Sugarbreak fitting into diet culture, but long term, I mean, do you see the products that you're creating? I don't know what you guys are working on in terms of new product. Like these three are obviously the sweet spot for you right now. No pun intended, but I think I'd love to know what the vision is of the future of the company and the other types of products that are ultimately tools for not just adults, but also children too.
The thing about, blood sugar is that I think everyone should think about it. And you can see that I love that, there's so many tech companies, Apple, Google are all racing to include it in their wearables. I believe it's the next big health biomarker KPI that everyone's going to measure themselves against. It was sleep. And that was, pretty, you're not sleeping. I know that. I was there, but this one you could actually action on it and you get really interesting insights on how to improve your health. And so I want everyone to think about their blood sugar. We talk about micro decisions, like even if you don't, insulin resistance, it doesn't happen overnight for most people. It's just these constant spikes and crashes that eventually puts your body out of whack, and you don't process glucose and use your insulin as efficiently as you should. So I want to be able to make blood sugar management easy for everyone. And even though it impacts this many people, not that many people understand it. People don't think it's sexy. Not that many people have created products to make it easier for people. And it's crazy to me because 1 and 2 is basically everyone.
Right. So you would think there's this huge market. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just want to create, products that fill that need, listening to our customers, and understanding what makes it tough for them and creating products that will make it easier for them to manage their blood sugar.
What are some of the biggest? I know I've heard you in other interviews talk about how really listening to the customer is so important, and it's having those anecdotes and really getting intimately able to know what they're facing on a day-to-day basis, like what you observed with your friend in particular. I've heard you share stories about an entire family that saw a ton of benefits from using Sugarbreak. But could you tell us, because so many people don't realize necessarily what they could be doing to themselves, like what are some of the common things that your customers are facing as sticky situations or tough instances where they're like, oh, this product could solve that problem for me? Are there like a couple that come to mind?
Having a cookie, stopping at one, like a lot of people, think about resist. I'm like, It's about moderation, right? Like if you don't want to have any sweets, great. Like just take it and don't have that dessert you're going to order at dinner. But if you have trouble stopping after you have one cookie and you end up eating the whole bag, you can also have that one cookie and just take it afterwards and then don't have the whole bag. So like these are like little tools to help. And what triggers you or what time of the day that happens, right? So having that and having that control and making that difference, you can do it. I think another thing is sort of culturally how we eat. You said you spent some time in China. A lot of cultures, it's eating, and the person who's cooking is cooking for entire family, and you eat as an entire family. Yep. And sometimes that makes it really difficult to have control what you actually, if you're trying to eat less carbs, like if you're not going to turn down and ask to make something different and eat on your own. So having, part of creating Stabilize was allowing people to still, sit with their families and still have those meals and not be able to participate and still, and not feel guilty afterwards.
And I think that one is so important too. It reminds me of a time when I was in China and I had been invited. It was like a mutual friend. Her company had a location in China and she had a coworker who lived there. So she invited me to have lunch with her. It was with her. And I'm thinking, oh, it's just going to be me and her entire family. We all went to lunch together. And I'm sure you're laughing because that's super indicative of Chinese culture, right?
Right.
And, it's also very important, like food being at the center of so much of what we do. There's the association of like, well, I also don't want to offend this person by not eating what they want me to eat. And if you think about like the lazy Susan, if anybody's listening, you're like, what is that? So basically it's like I know in Chinese culture, it's not called that, but that's the one in the US that I think most people could compare to. It's basically on the center of the table and it spins around, and that's how you share food. So if you think about like a Thanksgiving meal, instead of everyone physically passing the bowl of whatever it is, it's the same kind of idea. And everyone kind of takes their turn to take it. And when I was having this lunch, like they let me go first because I was the guest, right? So if you think about that moment and like the attention's all on you, everyone's looking at your plate, like definitely like heightened attention that you may not necessarily want when it comes to food. So I completely identify with what you're saying there. And then even twofold with the clients that I work with, a lot of them are moms. And one of the biggest challenges that they face is they're like, I am busy and I don't want to make 3 meals. So I don't want to make a meal for my kids. I don't want to make a meal for myself. And then my husband doesn't want to eat what I want to eat. That is one of the number one just pieces of pushback I get from someone when they're starting a diet. And honestly, I'm going to be harsh and say that I do think that's a little bit of an excuse. And it's because we can figure out ways for everyone to essentially eat the same things. We just modify the ingredients a little bit and making the meal a little more flexible. And that's kind of how I approach it. I look at things in terms of ingredients instead of recipes. And then mom can switch out what she wants that's going to be better fit towards her goals. And then let's take it a step further and say, okay, maybe you gave in because the pasta was there, because I get a lot of, well, I ate this off my kid's plate. I get that a lot, especially because mom usually will feed them first and then she's starving. So that's where Sugarbreak can come in.
only time she can eat is between bites for the child. So
exactly. So that's where something like Sugarbreak could come in with everything. I think every one of the products is relevant to that certain type of situation. And I'm curious, between all three, were they all launched at the same time, or was one of them like the OG?
They were all launched at the same time.
Okay. So they were all in production and everything. Like when you guys kind of set out to come up with the first product set of SKUs, what I'd love to know, and like this is my startup brain and like wondering about the creation of the company itself, like was it just a matter of collecting the feedback from people who are dealing with these issues and that really drove the research for the products, or how did that kind of come to be?
Yeah, so the first product, which is the Resist Strip, was actually the first one that was
okay.
formulated.
And I think that one's so interesting. Yeah. I've heard you talk about the sandpaper analogy about sugar. So I'd love for you to share that with the listener.
So our Resist Strip is like a Listerine strip with the added benefit of blocking the taste of sweet, because it uses an Ayurvedic herb called Gymnema, which in Hindi means sugar destroyer, and it mimics the sugar molecule and blocks your sweet receptor on your tongue. So as soon as it dissolves, you cannot taste sweet for up to an hour. If you put a pack of white sugar in your mouth, which is what I did when I tested it, it would feel like sand in your mouth immediately. And it makes you so hyper aware of what you're eating without the sugar.
And did that make you realize that sugar is in more things than we recognize? Because I think that's a big piece of all of this. Like, just like food quality today, there's a lot of additives that are impacting our blood sugar without us recognizing it, that we think something is quote unquote healthy.
I've always been someone who's been very conscious of sugar and reading labels, but I think a lot of our customers have then been like, wait, but like you said it did, it wouldn't impact savory foods, but my ketchup tastes weird now. Like in my burger,
there's sugar in your ketchup, ladies and gentlemen. In case anyone didn't know, if you've had like real ketchup, it tastes totally different. Like homemade ketchup tastes totally different.
And salad dressing, they're like, oh, this is really healthy. I'm like,
that's a huge one. Mm-hmm.
A lot of sugar in there. And so, when thinking about that, I think looking at the herb, we didn't want it to be like a weight loss company. Mm-hmm. I really think it should be focused on your health and managing your blood sugar, and not focused on, because that's what you're trying to improve your health base. That's the best way to see whether you're doing better. And then that herb actually, when you ingest it, blocks sugar inside your intestine from being absorbed as well. And then, so we started talking to diabetics and trying to understand what was really difficult in their lives. And we designed all of our products around that, and we named them so it would be really easy to understand, like resist sugar, stabilize your blood sugar, reduce your blood sugar. And then the kids line, which you mentioned,
yes, I'd love for you to touch on that
later. And we developed that and launched that with our launch at Target in April. And that was also, again, through customer insights, where they would write to us. They're like, are you going to create a kids line? Because my kid also has issue with sugar,
mm-hmm.
and
it starts early.
And it starts, 1 in 5 kids in the US are pre-diabetic or obese. And so it starts really early. It's, the leading 70% of them end up being, pre-diabetic, diabetic, obese in adulthood. So we wanted to solve that problem early and create something that was a lot more proactive. And you talk about a lot of moms you work with, they said the number one thing is getting their child to eat. They're like, of course, mm-hmm. I know what's healthy. But if it's a choice between giving my child a mac and cheese dinner versus them not eating at all, I'm going to make that. I'm going to give them the mac and cheese. So, when we reformulated Stabilize for kids, not only did we make it into a more delicious gummy, but it was also about making that meal a little healthier for the child by, blocking some of the carbs, converting some of it to fiber, and also relieving some of that mom guilt, because mom guilt is real.
It's very real. So for kids, is there Reduce as well, or is it just Stabilize? Okay.
There's Reduce and there's Resist. So Resist, the strip, is a berry flavor. Reduce, it is a daily vitamin. And so instead of the regular vitamins that you have for you would give your child. We
Mhm.
have the vitamins plus additional herbs that also support blood sugar.
Cool. That's really cool. And I want to just basically repeat something you just said, Scarlett, because it's so important in saying that the goal at Sugarbreak was not to be a weight loss company. And then you followed it up by saying it's about health. And I think that's something that I do feel in the last almost 2 years and everything that's gone on in the world. I think that's becoming so much more apparent to people because they've been forced to slow down and can do the thing that I was describing of like doing the hard thing and looking at yourself in the mirror. And people have kind of like had to face some of their habits that might not be the best for them, right? And I think that people tend to lose sight of, going back to the whole diet culture conversation too, people tend to lose sight of the fact that a lot of times weight loss and health, while they can go hand in hand, they don't, because we get too focused. Like in my mind, they're often very two separate goals. So when I work with people, we talk about my coaching. I am certified through a company called the Nutritional Coaching Institute. And we essentially have this like pyramid, and it's a triangle, and it's different goals, and they completely counteract each other. And it's based on your physique, or weight loss and fat loss is what I should really say, versus longevity being the other one on the other side. And the longevity piece really goes into health. And the last one is performance. And I do think it kind of ties both of them together. But really, I often see this struggle between weight loss and fat loss and wanting to look a certain way. And I think to contextualize it even further for people, think about like bikini or bodybuilders. Those shows are called physique competitions. They're not called health shows. And there's a reason for that. So I love the fact that Sugarbreak stands for that. And I'd also love to know, I know we talked a little bit about the packaging and you brought that up, and I love the reasons behind why it should be a little bit more fun and exciting. And even for anybody who wants to know, when you get the Sugarbreak box in the mail, it's actually like basically filled with like confetti I love the color like of the little, like instead of it being filled with like just like plastic. It's right. Really cute. I'm going to take a picture of it and put it on my Instagram. But it's very Instagrammable, that's for sure. So the marketing, I have a marketing brain. I actually, in my full-time gig, I do marketing for a pretty large health club. It's like 50,000 square feet. It's brand new. We have 4 studios. So I spend a lot of time figuring out how can we highlight all the different services and features. And we're very focused on families. So I think that there's a lot of elements that probably cross over between the two companies and everything. But I really want to know, I've been dying to ask you this, the name, who came up with it? What is like, is there a cool story behind it? Or was it just like you got with a marketing firm or like some kind of outside consulting firm and they helped you guys with it? Like, is there anything cool about it? Because I love it. It's great.
It's great. My co-founders are actually from the branding world. So
nice.
Sugarbreak was the name that they came up with, but we did think about it. We're like, is this the right name for us? Is it too focused on sugar? Will people understand what we're trying to do? Because there's something, broader sort of blood sugar messaging.
But I think the other problem is like blood sugar to say the words blood sugar is so unsexy. And if we throw the word glucose or insulin out there, people are going to be like, this sounds like very like scientific.
But I like that it was to the point, like, even though you might not necessarily know, you know the gist of what our company is trying to do, and it's easy to remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. And I'm curious with that, of your point of view, the word sugar and the potential like downside to that. Have you received any sort of negative feedback in the context of essentially like someone saying, oh, you're trying to like tell people that sugar is so bad for you and you shouldn't eat it, like in the hyperbolizing it at all? Has that come up for you guys?
Oh, yes.
So what's your take? I know your rebuttal, but like what's your guys' take on that? Like, I'm sure you anticipated that it would happen because this is a touchy subject, let's say.
I didn't realize it would be as touchy because like, to me, I'm like, it's pretty obvious the research is there that sugar is not good for you. That's not something up for debate, but our philosophy has, I go back to it. I'm not saying cut it all out. If that's what you want to do, good for you. But a lot of people can't do it. And we're here to make it easier for people. I'm not dictating what you should do with your life. But if that's your goal, I want to be here to support you.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. And I also, I think that it's one of those things where like you can't make everybody happy, right? So it's like you have to think about like your ultimate mission of being able to educate as many people as possible. And I'm all for, and I hope that more and more of the people that interview you and that you're pitching the product to recognize like how much healthier this talk track of moderation actually is, because it's realistic and it actually meets the person where they are. And that's something, even tying it back to the holidays, that's what I tell people. I've taken on like 3 new clients in the last month, and every single one of them, when we started, I look at the calendar and I say to them, we're not going to diet right now. And that might not be what you want to hear from me. I'm going to help you put in better habits around your food, but I'm not going to sit here and cut your calories for the next 8 weeks. And if you want to know why, it's because we have Thanksgiving, then we have Christmas, then we have New Year's. And if you and I are both recognizing the fact that you're a human being, I'd be doing you a disservice by encouraging you to go into a caloric deficit as of November 1st, because it's just that much harder. And the thing that I think people tend to forget, and I feel like your company could definitely relate to this, is like, we're in this for perpetuity. You are doing this for the rest of your life. And I know we were joking about like, we do this 2-month thing between November and January and like destroy everything and eat everything in sight and whatever. And then January rolls around and it's like, that speaks to that exactly, because it's like, why? You're going to keep going through that every single year as long as you're here. So why rush into a diet when we can better set ourselves up for success come January 1st? Because I teach you how to manage yourself in those situations. I just dropped a podcast episode not too long ago and part of my holiday series, and I literally titled it "How to Not Eat Like an Asshole," because that's what it comes down to. And I think it's like, I'm joking, but I'm also not. And it's a little more approachable to be funny about it, because it's kind of true. Like I could speak to that, and I've definitely done that plenty of times.
I just think about how, like, people make fun of those people who go for a run on Thanksgiving, but also somehow we're all accepting that at 3 p.m. everyone's lying on the couch like super full and wondering why we ate so much.
Yeah, seriously. And kind of keeping in the vein of just like feedback or pushback or any kind of just counter arguments to the development of this company. I know that you've had a pretty successful run at the capital raising piece of this, and did it during a time when it was obviously harder to access and get in front of people, which I imagine made it that much more challenging. But Sugarbreak has gotten on the shelves in Target within 6 months, as I mentioned. I think that's really cool. And I know that your co-founders have some great relationships there. I didn't know about Method and Ripple, and I heard you mention that in another show. I love both of those products, so that's awesome. But I'd love to know what was with the investors who maybe chose not to invest with you, or ones who ultimately did, but still brought their concerns. What were some of them from more of the business perspective?
I think, well, first of all, I'm a female founder, of color. So I have to bring that up, because the number of venture funding dollars statistically is less than 2% for us and for women. And then I think it's so negligible when you become a woman of color that I think it's less than
Seriously,
1%,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
which makes it really difficult in a job during the pandemic. But one of the questions I get, like, how come no one else thought of this?
Especially given how if we go back to the whole problem solution, and that's the idea of companies, right? That it is so widespread.
And so, that's like a very frustrating question for me, because
because what are you supposed to say? You're like, I don't know. What, am I smarter than these people? Like, how do you answer that? Well, how did you answer it?
I think it's a change in mindset, right?
Sure.
Maybe, I don't know. First of all, I think idea is an idea. It's all about execution. And, as an entrepreneur, that.
Amen.
But also,
I've never heard a truer statement on this on the show.
But also, I think now it was a right time for this company now, because I think that people started shifting their mindset to be more proactive with their own health, do their own research, and believe in medicine other than the traditional pharmaceutical medicine. And I think that was sort of driven by, more information, wearables, CBD, opioid crisis. I think all of this sort of combined started moving people to, research and want to try out what, alternative medicine.
And shifting the consumer behavior that way.
Yeah. And
that makes sense.
And I think, when we looked at investors, we're a B Corp. I have a very strong sort of mission of wanting to move the needle. And in addition to that, part of it is addressing the over-indexing of blood sugar in communities of color and marginalized communities. So those were really important things that I thought about when I brought on investors to invest in Sugarbreak, because I wanted them to be aligned and, believe in the same mission. And we actually had to turn down capital from people who weren't aligned. And it was very scary doing that.
Yeah, but I'm happy you brought that up. I'm really happy you brought that up, especially I think to tie it back to being a female too, right? Like It's okay to say no. And it's important to listen to your gut if those things don't match up. I would imagine that I would guess, and I'd love for you to break this down for us, from some of those investors that you did turn down, did you know after having the pitch meeting with them that they weren't the right fit immediately?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But still, it's scary. I'm like, wait, we're talking about millions of dollars. Like, did I make the right decision? Yeah. Mm-hmm. What if this doesn't happen? And you just have to be, I say sometimes like entrepreneurs are a little crazy, because like you have to have this like stubbornness to be like, it's going to be okay, I believe in this, and someone else will invest. So the investors I have are absolutely amazing. One of them, they only invest in companies with female founders, so they're really even the playing field. Another one only invests in B Corps, and we have another one that only focuses on companies that improve East Side communities, so communities of color, marginalized.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so I have an amazing, investor set that really believes in our mission, is trying to help me realize all the things that we want to get done with Sugarbreak.
And how much would you say your experience with your fertility company sets you up for making those seemingly scary decisions? Because I know that company, it ended probably not on the note that you wanted it to. Obviously, everything happens for a reason, and now you're here with Sugarbreak. But how much of that experience, in two capacities, one, in that being your first leap into the medical world, and now you're obviously still very much connected to it, but in two, just like facing those types of situations where you did have to choose a harder path potentially. How much did that influence your confidence going into this round with Sugarbreak?
Oh, it influenced me a lot. Every experience teaches you a lot. And I think I was more focused on what I wanted to achieve with the business and being really sticking to that based on my experience with my prior company, and making sure that everyone I brought on was completely aligned there.
And I'll bring up your other job experiences with this question as a follow-up too. You started at Deloitte. So and you were a CPA, right? You weren't in just the consulting. Okay. My dad is actually a CPA. So I have grown up all around that. And,
really interesting lives.
Very interesting. Very interesting. But you know what? It makes your life a lot easier when you are running a business. So it definitely does. The conversations, I actually just had a conversation with a coworker about this the other day, and I've talked to friends about this. The conversations that I had at the dinner table growing up were very different than maybe what some of my friends were talking about. And it made me much more prepared by the time I did go to college and go off on my own, because we aren't learning a lot of these life skills in school. But I'd love to know in your case, outside of, having the experiences of being in different industries and that kind of helping you better figure out what you wanted to do and what your mission was, tying it all the way back to my very first question of being here to leave the earth better than you found it and to help people. How do you think that version of Scarlett that was just out of college, she took that job at Deloitte, like what do you think from that experience you've carried with you all the way through into now this role at Sugarbreak? Like if you could pick one thing, is there a value or an experience that's just kind of stuck with you that now impacts your hiring decisions or the culture you're trying to create or something like that?
Right. I think one of the things I really loved at Deloitte was the camaraderie, because you have these starting classes. They're
Yes.
still, some of my closest friends. And no matter how hard and grueling the work was, like, honestly, we were working 6-7 days a week,
Oh yeah.
up until 2 a.m. and have, it was not fun, but it was still fun to show up at work because you have these people that you really like, that, you spend time with. So I think it taught me how important the people in the company are. I really believe when people say, like, they don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And
I
then the
completely agree.
other thing is the meritocracy side. And because of how we had starting classes and how we would work with a lot of people, there's a very transparent sort of ranking process that happens. And I thought that was really incredible because everyone wants to know where they stand, where they can improve, and how they are compared to other people, because that sort of unfairness also creates sort of resentment within a lot of companies that I've seen. So in building Sugarbreak, I think one of the coolest things and the things that I'm most proud about is the culture that I've been able to build, and having my team tell me, after joining within the first month, coming up to me and just saying, I've never been happier at a
That's the
job
best.
in my life.
That's like the best compliment you can get
And
as the CEO, right?
That's
your pulse check. Yeah.
That makes me incredibly happy. Customers are super important, but I think if I can't take care of my team can't do a good job in creating product and taking care of our customers either. So they're really key to the success of Sugarbreak.
Yeah. And I identify with that so much as somebody who has done a similar path of being in finance, working for larger companies, then going to smaller. And I think a lot of times in that transition out of startups, if it comes from a person who did have that experience, like, I'm so grateful for that experience, because I see how you can like take for granted some of the processes that were just handed to you when you were working at such a large company, right? And then if you do go to try to create it yourself, sometimes you almost skip those steps because you're like, oh, well, that's there. And it's like, no, wait, it's actually not. And someone needs to create it entirely, right? And so you're thankful for having had that experience because you see the value in it, because it changed so much of that culture. And I would argue too, I lived in North Carolina and Charlotte for a long time. So I had a lot of friends who worked at Deloitte and PwC. And when I think of both of those companies, I think about what you just said of like their ranking process and what that's like. And I always had this sense from anyone I knew that worked there, they were really good friends with their friends at work. And I didn't always necessarily like understand that because I never had that experience in some of the larger places that I was at. Like I never had that like work life or whatever it was, you know what I mean? Whereas I feel like those people definitely do. And it's just like, that's a testament to those companies and the brands that they've created in the spaces that they're in. And I also think that I love what you said about, yes, your customers are important, but so are your employees, and your employees being happy will ultimately drive the customer to being happy. And in the fitness industry, I think that's actually a problem. And I do think that's actually a really big reason why so many fitness professionals have gone off to do their own thing. Because I have been in multiple situations where I felt like everything was for the sake of the customer, to the point where it was like, well, I'm not even consistently practicing what I'm preaching to the customer just for me to deliver this experience to them. It's sacrificing my sleep and my health, and yet I'm in this health industry and I'm supposed to be walking the walk and talking the talk, and I'm not exactly doing both. So I know, in making the decisions that I have on the path that I've chosen to work on my own and also work with other people, that's been something that's now a non-negotiable of like, if the management team that I'm with doesn't have that value, it just is a clear delineation for me. And unfortunately, it took some bad experiences to figure that out, but I'm super grateful that I had those too, right? So I'm sure you could, in all your travels and all the different types of roles you've had, I'm sure you could definitely attest to that.
Yeah. And I'm excited to meet people who are also starting their own companies and trying to make a change. So there will be more companies that are focused on culture and treating their teams well and still be successful.
100%. And I mean, even with that of like seeing other emerging companies coming out of this, in us talking about the fact that like anything around blood sugar is going to become the next hot biofeedback marker. What kinds of opportunities do you see for Sugarbreak to be able to partner with, say, some of these wearables? For example, like I think about Levels and I see like a massive synergy between you guys, right? Because it's like, okay, Levels brings you the tech, and they bring you the awareness and the insights, but then something like Sugarbreak kind of like carries you to the finish line, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I get so excited with all of these new developments in technology, and I hear about them all the time of different companies working on new things that are non-invasive because continuous glucose monitors are great but they're super expensive, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's a few $100s to become a part of it.
And we can't have that be the next big biomarker if it's not accessible to a lot of people. And we want to be able to be that product partner across the spectrum, from like more affordable options that are coming out, that are non-invasive, sort of clear, the people working on non-invasive continuous glucose monitors that don't have to link to your phone. So you don't need to have an iPhone, that you can quickly be able to tell on a scale whether or not you're high, medium, or low.
That's really cool.
All the way to, an Apple Watch.
Right.
And we can work with, any or all of them to help people make it, manage their blood sugar more easily.
What are, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of those companies that are kind of, I don't know if like all of them are really in their infancy or any of them are at the point where you guys are, where they're out in the market, that are kind of going to move in that direction and change the game and making this more accessible. And I'm asking because I think that's probably like the first limitation I see in the space of like, well, how do we get that accuracy? A lot of it does have to do with like literally getting under the skin, right? So what are, even if you can't tell me like some of the companies themselves, like what are the types of products that they're developing?
So one of the products that we are actually bringing to the market is a saliva glucose swab.
Oh, cool.
So it is almost like a mini, if you've done the COVID test.
Yeah, I was going to say the first thing that comes to my mind is the COVID
you put in your
test.
saliva after you eat, 2 hours after eating, and then it helps measure post-meal, postprandial blood sugar.
Does it give you like a number, or just tells you like low, medium, high?
Low, medium, high. Okay. But then it's super affordable. You don't need to prick yourself.
Right.
You only need to get,
that's one of the biggest issues with diabetics.
And, hopefully by introducing something like this, then all those people who don't know or what their blood sugar means to them will be a little bit more knowledgeable, because we know that lots of people out there who do have issues don't even know.
That's really cool. Yeah, I love that. I think that's awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time because you're obviously working on lots of cool things and I could talk to you forever, but I'm excited about all of those new developments and keeping tabs on Sugarbreak and where you guys are going. And I'd love, we've mentioned Target. I'm assuming you guys are on Amazon too, because why wouldn't you be there? What are, and your website, right? Oh, you're in CVS too, right?
We're in CVS.
Very cool.
We are also in Hy-Vee. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're a Midwestern grocer.
Okay.
You would love them. They're very progressive. They have dietitians
That's so
on
cool.
site in every single store, and a gym, most of them being Orange Theories. So they're
really
that's
so cool.
into having a holistic lifestyle, incorporating eating and exercise into a healthy lifestyle. So
I have to go look them up now. That's awesome.
And we're also going to be in Thrive Market. And
exciting that I see that perfectly fitting in well. That's really cool.
And doctors' offices by the end of the year.
I'm very excited about that last one, because I think to bring it full circle from the start of our conversation and some of the comments that I made about these micro decisions and being in doctors' offices, I think it's so important that if we can start changing those conversations that are happening there, and a lot of it just has to do with training. I think, I talk to people about this a lot, and I don't think the average person necessarily recognizes the fact that when you go to your doctor, they may have only learned about 20 minutes of nutrition in all the years of and expenses that they spent in medical school and residency, which is mind blowing. But it's like, in a way, you can't fault them necessarily because that's the way they were taught and that's the way their brains then work when they're looking at the situation in front of them with an illness or something that someone has. However, I think that instead of looking at that as a negative, I see that as, for someone like myself and the other nutrition coaches in my space, taking our own continuing education very seriously and being able to be equipped with the knowledge that we can then tie in a lot of the information that, while I can't necessarily draw up someone's blood work myself, I can encourage a client to go get it and then be able to interpret it for them in a different way, in that holistic way. Then be able to say, the whole time I've been sitting here with you, Scarlett, my mind has actually been spinning a little bit because I have a few clients that I work with who deal with a lot of digestive health issues. And the number one thing that we cut out, like top thing that we have to get rid of for some amount of time, is any type of artificial sweetener, period, because it can wreck your gut along with alcohol. And that's probably a conversation for another day. But I was thinking when we were talking through all of the products, like even in just thinking about something like Reduce or even with Stabilize, like, wow, like how could that impact those people? Because a lot of the supplements that I give them 2 or 3 different types of supplements and I'm really on top of them about their food and meal timing to encourage regulated blood sugar, because that is a very underrated but super important component of improving your gut health. And these are women who are dealing with such severe, uncomfortable issues with bloat that they like don't want to eat. And it completely takes away that relationship that they have with food, and it can discourage them from feeling like it's enjoyable, much in the same way a lot of the diabetics that you've worked with and know personally are facing too.
I mean, bloating, the reduction of that is one of the first comments we get from
people who take Stabilize. I know. I'd want to go send this to all of them now that we talked about some of it. I'm like, I just drew the connection while we were sitting here. I'm like, I have 3 people in mind that I want to tell about Sugarbreak. So it's great. This is awesome. And that's the best part of podcasting.
But you just read my mind, because we actually, as part of going to doctors' offices, we released a bunch of research guides and podcasts in partnership with the Natural Medicine Journal.
That's amazing.
And our charitable partner, the Diabetes Research Institute, that actually has continuing education credits attached to it.
Nice.
So
okay.
anyone who wants to learn more about blood sugar tools and our ingredients and how that works, please look us up. And if you need a few CE credits before the end of the year, which most practitioners do,
yes,
you can get them just by reading about us.
Awesome. That's great. Well, good to know. And we'll definitely link all of that down in the show notes. So I really appreciate you sharing that too. And I will wrap up the episode with a super fast lightning round that I usually do. And they're all fun questions, like lighthearted things to just kind of end the show on a little bit more of a relaxed note. Since we started with coffee, we'll end with something fun. You ready?
Sounds good. I feel like these might be harder than the others.
No. Well, I'm going to start. We talked about you being in New York, and we've been talking about food. So I'm going to ask the first question. If you could only eat at one restaurant in New York City for the rest of your life, where would it be?
See, this is really
This
hard.
is a tough one. And I was going to say favorite, but that's boring. So if you could only eat, maybe like if you had to pick a category, I don't know, like what's your favorite cuisine? And then we can dial it in from there.
Oh, I think my favorite dish is spaghetti and meatballs.
Okay. So if you could only eat at one Italian restaurant, where would it be?
I know, but I don't have a favorite. This is really tough.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
I'm stumping you with this one.
You're really stumping me with this one.
You were right. Sometimes these are harder.
These are harder. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I would say that my favorite restaurant used to be 11 Madison Park.
Okay.
And not because it's a Michelin restaurant, but because it's like the best meal that I've had. But they completely changed their menu.
Well, I was going to say, what do you think about their, this is not a lightning round question, but what are your thoughts on the move to all vegan? It's completely different than what it was.
Completely. I had really high hopes because I also tried to have a mainly sort of, plant diet for the environment and for the animals. But the review on the New York Times was pretty brutal.
Wasn't great. So. I know. Well,
I don't know.
We'll see. Maybe they just need time. I don't know. But yeah, because it was like a huge announcement too. Yeah. So I feel like there was a lot riding on that. So we'll see if they can turn it around. Keeping with the food theme, what are some of your favorite, you mentioned that you keep a mostly plant-based diet. Do you still eat a lot of seafood? Like, are you more of a pescatarian? Like, what's kind of like your go-to like meal of choice that you like to eat at home, whether that's for dinner or lunch or something like that? Do you have any favorites?
Oh, I love fish. So seafood is definitely a preference. Easy grilled salmon, super easy. And then every now and then as a treat, I will have steak.
Nice. And let's talk about sweets. Like for you, what are some of your things that are making you reach for resist so that you don't eat like 10 cookies or whatever it is? Is there anything like that for you that's like, I don't know if I need to have the willpower in my pocket right now. I can't have this in the house.
I think every now and then I have craving for a piece of chocolate. Mm-hmm. I think I am worse with like carbs, so like
more savory type things.
More savory things like potato chips.
Yeah, me too.
That is tough for me.
And on a more intellectual note, do you have any, well, switch away from food. Do you have any like favorite books or podcasts or like, I don't know what you typically do outside of all things Sugarbreak in terms of like what you would enjoy? Because I'm sure you work often.
So I don't read or listen to podcasts enough. But I love, Scott Galloway and, just cause his predictions are so fascinating and the way that he looks at things, and he has a big focus on, blood sugar as well, because he talks about how that taxes, on the, productivity of a society.
Totally. I mean, if you think about I'll go to a more like classic relatable example for people, that like 2:00, like you're like, you have a crash or like that's when you want another coffee or whatever. And then maybe not making the best choice, or like, how does it affect our attention spans even and staying focused and getting work done? So I 100% agree. And I think that's a really fascinating topic to kind of like break down too.
Yeah. And book wise, I think Malcolm Gladwell, I
love him.
I also a New York resident and Canadian, but I
didn't know he was Canadian.
Yeah. I love, I loved his books. I think those are like the books that I read and really made me think about things differently.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I love about his books, like one of my favorite books ever is one of his, What the Dog Saw. And I just think it's one of those books that like, because of the way it's organized, and really most of them were columns that he just expanded on and put it into a collection so that they would be clustered together by topic and theme. It's one of those books where you read and not only is it kind of change your perspective, but the stories in there stick with you and you can remember them, and they apply to so many different areas of your life.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone knows about the 10,000 hour rule now because of him.
Yeah. So true. So true. Well, Scarlett, thank you again so much. I've really enjoyed having you on the FYX podcast. I know our listeners are going to get a ton of value out of this episode. So last but not least, super important, please tell us where we can find you, where we can find Sugarbreak. I can't talk anymore. Where we can find Sugarbreak and on social media and all that stuff. How can we get connected with you guys? And I'll be sure to link all of this down in the show notes.
Yeah, our website is sugarbreak.com. Super easy. Our social handles are all Take a Sugarbreak. And you can find us online on Amazon, like we said, and all the other retailers.
And where are you on social media?
Are
you a social media girl? Or is everything through Sugarbreak?
Most things are through Sugarbreak, but I do have a personal handle, and it's Scarlett_Leung.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you and have so enjoyed chatting with you today. To all of our FYX listeners out there, appreciate you guys. Please, if you found some ounce of value from this show, or because we know this is a widespread problem that we're trying to fix, someone else in your life who may find some knowledgeable and useful information from this, encourage them to check out Sugarbreak. We would really, really be grateful if you shared it with somebody in your life, whether that's posting on your social media page or just texting it to somebody. I think there's so much power in sometimes trying to have conversations that maybe are a little uncomfortable for people. Just be like, hey, check out this podcast. And it can be a little bit more of an innocent way of going about it or opening up that dialogue. This has been another incredible episode of the FYX Podcast, and I hope everybody has an amazing day. Thank you.